Imagine building your entire life on a foundation you think is solid, only for one single text message to quietly remove the last support holding it up. One moment, I believed I had mastered life. The highs, the movement, the admiration that followed me everywhere. The next, my phone vibrated in my hand, and the illusion began to loosen. I didn't panic. I didn't even react. That silence was the first warning, because in that pause, I realized something unsettling. My world hadn't been destroyed in that moment. It had been waiting for an excuse to fall apart. That realization forced me backward, replaying how I'd arrived here in the first place. Long before the message, I had been chasing a feeling I couldn't define. It started innocently. New places, new faces, constant stimulation. Every thrill felt like proof that I was living correctly. I mistook excitement for meaning and applause for approval. The more people admire my lifestyle, the more convinced I became that I was ahead of the curve. What I didn't notice was how dependent I had become on external validation to feel real at all. That dependence hid itself behind a dangerous belief: control. I told myself I was choosing this life deliberately, not running from anything. I framed indulgence as discipline in disguise. From the outside, it looked impressive: confidence, ambition, freedom. Internally, it felt calculated, like I was always managing a version of myself for others to consume. I thought control meant never needing anyone. In reality, it meant never slowing down long enough to notice how empty I felt without constant stimulation. Occasionally, the illusion slipped. In quiet moments, usually late at night, doubts surfaced. I wondered why satisfaction never stayed, why every high demanded another immediately after. The question frightened me, so I buried it under movement and noise. I convinced myself discomfort was weakness and introspection was for people who had settled. If I kept moving, I wouldn't have to answer the questions forming beneath the surface. But unanswered questions don't disappear, they wait. As I kept moving, something else began to fade. The people who actually knew me. I stopped returning calls that required emotional presence. Family gatherings became obligations instead of anchors. I surrounded myself with people who enjoyed the performance but never asked for depth. They praised my lifestyle, my confidence, my freedom. Slowly, without confrontation, genuine relationships loosened and fell away. I didn't chase them. I told myself independence required distance. Only later did I understand that connection requires maintenance, not convenience. Replacing real relationships with surface-level ones came at a cost I underestimated. Maintaining the image required constant feeding. More experiences, more generosity, more proof that I was still winning. Financial strain crept in quietly, hidden behind curated moments. Emotionally, I grew tired of pretending nothing affected me. I learned to smile convincingly while privately negotiating anxiety. The contradiction was exhausting. The more successful I appeared, the more fragile my internal world became. The circle around me shrank but intensified. These are people bonded by excess, not loyalty. When excitement dipped, so did their interest. Plans disappeared when I stopped entertaining or paying. Still, I held on. Loneliness had become my greatest fear, even though it followed me everywhere. I told myself this was the price of freedom. In reality, I was isolated inside a crowd, mistaking noise for connection. That isolation made the moment of discovery deceptively ordinary. I was standing in line for coffee when my phone buzzed. No dramatic name, no warning sign, just a preview that shouldn't have mattered. I missed last night already. We need to be more careful next time. My thumb froze. As the rest of the message loaded, my surroundings blurred. The words were calm, casual, written with the confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. someone who believed secrecy was already secure. Denial tried to rise, but the details crushed it instantly. Times, places, a private joke I recognized. This wasn't an accident. It was ongoing, rehearsed, and normalized. What unsettled me most wasn't the intimacy, it was the routine. Betrayal had been scheduled into someone's life so seamlessly that I had become an afterthought. While I believed I was living freely, someone close to me had been quietly editing me out of their real life. There was no dramatic explosion, no confrontation, just a hollow clarity that settled into my chest. Every late arrival I'd ignored resurfaced. Every excuse I'd accepted replayed itself with new meaning. The illusion didn't crack, it evaporated. In that moment, I understood something more painful than the cheating itself. This wasn't a single lie. It was a pattern sustained by my absence and indifference. The aftermath was quiet and merciless. Anger arrived slowly, followed by shame that burned deeper. I wasn't only furious at the betrayal, I was furious at myself. Regret highlighted moments I dismissed, choices I'd justified. For the first time in years, there was nowhere to escape. No distraction loud enough to silence the truth that my life, for all its movement, had been emotionally stagnant. Accepting that truth hurts more than discovering it. The betrayal hadn't appeared from nowhere. It had grown in the empty spaces I created. That realization demanded accountability. I couldn't position myself as a victim without acknowledging how my emotional absence had trained others to live without me. It was a brutal honesty, but it stripped away denial and left clarity in its place. Recovery didn't begin with forgiveness. It began with stillness. I stopped running. I sat with discomfort instead of numbing it. Admitting I didn't know how to build a meaningful life anymore felt like failure, but it was also a relief. I started small, returning calls, choosing solitude intentionally, declining invitations that offered nothing real. Each step felt unnatural, like learning to breathe properly after years of shallow breaths. Regret slowly transformed from punishment into instruction. It taught me that excitement is cheap, but fulfillment is deliberate. That admiration fades, but integrity compounds. I recognized how often I had mistaken being desired for being valued. That distinction reshaped everything. The pain didn't disappear, but became useful. I began rebuilding with intention rather than urgency. I questioned my motivations. I chose consistency over intensity. Relationships stopped being accessories and became responsibilities. I showed up even when it wasn't exciting. Especially then. My life grew quieter but stronger. There was no audience anymore, just alignment. The person who betrayed me gradually faded from the center of my story. Not because the wound vanished, but because it no longer defined me. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, but detachment was. I stopped needing explanations that would never satisfy me. Some answers only arrive through how you rebuild afterward. Loneliness changed shape. It became space instead of emptiness. I learned to exist without performing. My worth no longer rose and fell with attention. I didn't feel invincible, but I felt real. The highs were fewer, yet deeper. The lows were manageable because I wasn't running from myself anymore. Looking back, I understand how seductive the illusion was. A life full of motion can look impressive while going nowhere. I don't hate my past self. I recognize them. They were chasing significance without substance. The betrayal didn't destroy me. It exposed what needed rebuilding. Fulfillment arrived quietly. In routine, in honesty, in choosing what lasts over what dazzles. I stopped asking what would impress people and started asking what would sustain me. That shift changed everything. Healing remains ongoing. Old impulses still whisper. Shortcuts still tempt. But now I recognize them for what they are. I choose differently, not once but daily. That repetition has become my new foundation. If there's a lesson here, it's this. Betrayal often begins long before someone else crosses a line. It begins when we abandon presence, depth, and responsibility. When we build on temporary highs, collapse is only a matter of time. The text message wasn't the beginning of my pain. It was the end of my denial. And denial, I've learned, is far more dangerous than betrayal. I no longer chase perfection or excitement as proof of success. I chase alignment. My life may look smaller now, but it feels fuller and more honest. Some foundations only reveal their weakness under pressure. Mine did. Rebuilding took humility, patience, and restraint, but it gave me stability rooted in truth. That single message didn't ruin my life. It removed what was never real. What remained was slower, quieter, and finally strong enough to last.